Welcome everyone to the second episode of Painting Curse City. This time we're working with the mysterious objects, which are 2 ravens on pillars and 2 hanged skeletons. And the only difference really between the models is one of the skeletons has a bag over his head. I looked at several kit bashing options, but everything I tried seems to just overload the models too much. So we're giving one of the ravens a helmet and the other one a skull, and another one for this guy. Now, if you remember last time, I managed to accidentally knock off a bit of the earth texture while painting. Never again. This time, I've primed the models with Chaos Black, and I'm adding the AGRELLAN BADLAND after the primer, so it will have a bit more adhesion to the base and the finished product should be more resistant to the perilous fingers moving the model around the game board. And this is what it looks like when it's dried. And to top things off, I add a zenithal highlight with CORAX white. If you notice on the back, there's a spotted pattern from the primer, but I'm not going to worry about this since it will add some variation on our wood. Starting with skeleton horde, I coat the entire skeleton and a few of the skulls we have scattered around, giving them a good starting color we can improve later. Next, I prepare a brown wash using oil paints and thinner, and I mix until it reaches a consistency I like. I'm using bottle caps for this to avoid having to clean up after the painting session is done. I then apply this all over the wooden gallows. As soon as I'm done, I grab a Q-tip and start removing the excess paint, leaving the surface only stained by the wash. And we're doing the same thing with a dark blue wash for the ruined pillars. And the black wash for the ravens. Now, I'm quite happy how the pale ravens look, so I'm going to leave them like this. The blue wash, on the other hand, stayed long enough on the model, and now it's time to remove it. This way, we end up with a really vibrant blue color. Let's put the ravens down for now to work on the skellies. The first thing I want to do is highlight the gallows using a bit of BANEBLADE brown to switch up the colors of the wood. Next, I want to avoid the areas I just painted and add some DRYAD bark. On top of the DRYAD bark, I paint a thin layer of GORTHOR brown. Next up, I want to give the skeletons more love, so I do a light dry brush of ZANDRI dust, making sure to only hit the raised edges and to try and keep the paint out of the various recesses of the model. Don't forget the skulls. Next up, since I enjoy paler skeletons, we're going to do the same thing, this time using Screaming Skull for that lovely bone white. Next up, I base the parchments and the ropes using Wraith Bone. I then go over those areas with SERAPHIM SEPIA to give them a worn look. Next up, I take a brush with a fine point and use ELYSIAN SCARLET to draw some symbols on the paper. Here you can use your imagination and do whatever you feel like works. Next, I use ELYSIAN green to brighten up the plants around the skeleton. To make the wood look rotten and old, I give it a quick coat of Coelia green shade. For the sack, we'll give it a nice dark red color using KHORNE red. But enough skeletons for now, let's go back to the ravens. I take DRYAD bark again to coat the vines going up the pillar. And ELYSIAN green for the patches of grass and BANEBLADE brown to highlight the vines. For the keys, I used the same paint we used on the bells from the last episode, SYCORAX Bronze, as a base. While the other paints dry, I use some green shade on the grass and vines. And for the helmet, I start with a base coat of the old faithful LEADBELCHER for a general metallic look. For the horns, I use ZANDRI Dust and Screaming Skull, and I then shade them using Reichland Flesh Shade. Speaking of shades, I use Nuln Oil on the metallic parts of the helmet and the keys to darken them a bit. Once the shade dries, I add a few spots of NIHILAKH oxide on the key. I then dry brush FENRISIAN grey on the raised edges to lighten the pillar a bit on the top part. I mix the dark blue oil wash again, this time to stain the earth texture. When mixing paint in different batches, you can end up with quite stark differences. So once dried, the earth texture looks a bit darker and more saturated than last time, but that's not a big deal unless you're painting a whole army at the same time and want that cohesion. As a final step, I paint the rims of the bases with Chaos Black, and I follow up with a few spots of Carroburg Crimson once the old paint dries. And these are the models done. Thanks for watching everyone, and I hope you have enjoyed the series so far. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.